I'm just host for this event, and I'm going to be introducing everybody and giving you a little bit of their bio so you can get to know them before you hear them reading their wonderful works. So our third reader today is Aimee Lehmann, a fiction writer from Michigan, currently based in Ithaca. Her writing reflects a broad range of places as she's lived in Kenya, Sudan, Germany, Australia, and Brazil. Aimee was an English teacher and relief worker before becoming a full-time writer.
I'm reading a short story today. It's a new one, and I think it's the most autobiographical work that I've done to this point, but of course because I'm a fiction writer, none of it is true, except maybe the part about the bats and that my dog really did eat water balloons. Things we leave behind. My dog is shitting water balloons. It's not as glamorous as it sounds, believe me, although the little confetti-colored mounds do stand out from your typical backyard dog offerings. We're good parents, Tony and I. We usually feed Simba organic, grain-free, vegan even. That time that she acted funny after licking the toad. But as I scoop up her rainbow poo, hot pink, canary yellow, day-glow orange, I realize she must have eaten the remnants of some kid's party, a multi-pack. Luckily, I'm home early, but I do wish she had better timing. Tonight we host the annual neighborhood party. As the cool couple on the block, childless and cool, which somehow goes together, it's our turn to set up the wet bar out front and the bonfire out back for the St. Johannes Fest. It's an old German or Nordic or Swiss tradition that's held firm in our little corner of suburbia, a holdover from days past, when people used to use it to ward off bad spirits or the evil eye, or a hex placed upon them by jealous neighbors. Our jealous neighbors, Anna and Steve, will be there, telling us again how envious they are of our party hosting life, our travels, our Peace Corps years. Africa, oh Africa, they'll say, telling us how much they'd longed to do the Peace Corps but never taken the chance, and now, oh well, we'll sip our cocktails and pet Simba as they tend to their children, one tugging at a pant leg, the other cradled in the crook of an arm. We all moved to the neighborhood about the same time and met while standing in line to jump the bonfire. A leap hand in hand over the flames was said to bestow a special blessing on new couples, celebrating the wild adventure of youth before the staid and earthbound years of family to come, though not to us, which is why we're still cool. Back then, we were something of minor celebrities. We just returned together from the Peace Corps, and the Sunday Styles had featured us with a photo, our two bright, smiling faces in front of a giraffe, setting us on a path toward grand expectations, which mostly we've lived up to. I dumped Simba's poo into the trash. Usually her dog bombs go into the compost, but not today given the water balloon fiasco. No plastic in the compost. Tony would go ballistic. He's a master composter, that's a title, and uses the compost for his annual beds, which have won us the best yard competition 3 years running. I'm sure it's one of the reasons that we've been chosen to host, and under our supervision, all's gone well. Even the year the Holloway's drunken daughter didn't quite negotiate the full length of the fire pit, her jeans got cinched, but no harm done, and she'd removed her jacket before the jump so it didn't catch fire. We still have that jacket. I'd always meant to give it back, but that's what happens. Things get left behind. When I left for Africa, I left pretty much everything behind, apart what I could fit into a single Land's End duffel. It didn't hold much, and most of what it did, although seemingly vital when I packed it in Ann Arbor, didn't hold much use once I got to Kenya. The only really useful things were those 3 extra-strength hefty bags and a box of Mrs. Grass's chicken noodle soup. The hefty bags came in handy for draping over the top of my rectangular, government-issued mosquito net, not the fancy, diaphanous, out-of-Africa kind that would be useless, because the bats that perched overhead in the rafters of my room peed down on me all night. And the Mrs. Grass's soup I sipped while nursing myself back to health after my first round of dysentery. The special flavor egg added just the right amount of salt necessary for my recovery. Those are not the typical stories you usually tell about Peace Corps, or the one about Chege, my Kenyan colleague, who shared teaching duties with me at our village school. a guy my age who left the staff room on a Monday with a headache and by Wednesday was dead. He had malaria, which was probably why Peace Corps threatened to send us home if we didn't take our weekly prophylaxis of mefloquine, a treatment drug which we used for prevention, even knowing it would leave behind a resistant strain. I thought about that after Chege died. That kind of knowledge, though, ruins the mystique of Peace Corps for other people. People like Anna and Steve, who ooh and ah over our Kenyan photos with the same exaggerated enthusiasm we use when viewing their latest ultrasound. A murky photo of some grayish blob we should all be so happy about. I'm sure it's just coincidental that every time we fail to conceive, they have more good news to share, forcing me to grab a greeting card from my stash at the back of our hutch so I don't have to stand again, sobbing in the aisle of kidney drugs. It's not that we don't have it good, of course. We have Simba and our house and garden. We have our pictures of Kenya and all the exotic places we've gone since. We throw parties with top-shelf liquor while Anna and Steve clean kitty crayon from their mid-century decor. I call Simba over for a treat. She hears her name and starts wagging, tail first, and then all 1 foot long of her. When we got her from the shelter, we wanted to give her a sweet Swahili name to reference our Kenyan past. We chose Simba, lion, to reflect the color of her coat. Not knowing her DNA, we had no idea that she'd max out as a rather midget dog. Meta, we'd say, as if it was purposeful, spinning things, the way you do, when they don't really go your way. I think about the discrepancy in Simba's name later when the fire chief arrives to give us the go-ahead for the bonfire. He hears me calling her name and laughs as I go running, plastic bag mittened to the corner of the yard. I've seen her crouching, and I arrive just in time to catch it. In my pre-dog owner days, I never would have imagined dog poo catching, but God forbid one of the neighbors should step in it. You have to look out for your neighbors. After Chege died, it was the neighbors who laid about. There weren't mortuaries or funeral homes or strangers to treat the dead. It was the local women who washed him and prepped him, treating him with salves and coins, setting him out on 2 boards behind the house, praying over him too. There was wailing at the funeral, very biblical stuff, women renting their clothes, shrieking the air, falling down in grief, which seemed to me an appropriate response, better than the stoic, quiet, private grief we tend to honor here. Just before 6, Brad from around the block shows up, his grill joining ours beside the garage. He and Tony will stand there all night like 2 grooms on a wedding cake, flipping burgers and browning brats while I work the crowd. Half an hour into the party, I finally meet the new neighbors from across the street, a couple whose raucous rutting reminds me of Tony and I back in the early days, when everything was about not getting pregnant. Besides not taking your mefloquine, the other mandatory ticket home from Peace Corps was pregnancy. And that in a country where plastic pen testing wasn't available or any way to do anything about it. Which meant that confirmation came the old-fashioned way. Boobs blossomed, hard to the touch, zapping in pain every time you reached across the desk, stomach churning and vomit rising. There was a hope that the Giardia tablets from the first aid kit would cure things, but when there didn't, there was a need to think strategically about what to accomplish before Peace Corps kicked you out. Tony and I decided on a trip to Ethiopia in the north. It would be our final fling and my last chance to see something of the continent before I had to abandon it in disgrace. Tony would be staying, of course. He was no medical emergency the way my burgeoning belly would make me. He still had 8 months in country, and who knew what would happen, with one of us home, the other left behind. Arriving in Addis, we saw nothing to compare with Nairobi. Its lack of a colonial history meant that Ethiopia's capital couldn't compete with Nairobi's private clubs and bars, its racing grounds or tourist cafes, or any of the other structures that the British had left. But once out of the city, the country astounded. Rolling hills that climbed into mountains, lush green terraced slopes that looked as fertile as I grudgingly felt, patches of white smoked fires clearing the farmers' fields. Tony builds up the bonfire for the few couples still willing to jump it, while I scout the yard, seeing Simba looking furtive at the edge of our lawn. She squats, shuffles forward, squats again, looking for solitude. But the yard is fuller than before. She looks back over her shoulder, finding me, her eyes catching mine. They hold in their gaze a plea. The shame of her body, rejecting something it never wanted in the first place. On that twisty road through northern Ethiopia, 5 days into our journey, it started. The cramps came first, gripping my insides, clawing, grasping. It didn't want me either. Crowded into the back of a beat-up minivan, we climbed and turned and double-backed. The pain, the wet, the knowing what was happening. Tony arguing with the driver to stop. People piled out of the vehicle so I could find a boulder alongside the road. Me, crouching, looking back over my shoulder, seeing all the other passengers trying to watch or not watch, while I, this white woman hunched by the side of the road, pleaded for some privacy as I spilled out something shiny and red onto the soil. Without the relief I had imagined, the lost promise of something I wouldn't have later. They waited for me as I dug through my bag, finding my kanga, that 2-meter long and 1-meter wide swath of African fabric, a wrap in cold weather, a headscarf in the heat, a towel, a sack, a blanket, the thing mothers use to swaddle their babies or carry them. I used mine to clean up what was left of the blood, and then folded it against me to dampen the surge of what was still coming. Tony helped me into the car. We kept going. We keep going.